so does that mean that demotivated men are producing less testosterone?
We can say that the data show that repeated failures take testosterone levels lower than they would be otherwise.
Boosting testosterone levels is like unlocking a hidden power within you. It's not about being tough or trying to show off, but it's more about finding your own strength and resilience. These qualities, they make us feel confident, they make us feel brave. Testosterone isn't just a hormone that our body makes, it's like a signal, inviting us to work on ourselves, to make ourselves better, stronger, smarter. When we work on boosting our testosterone, we're also working to become better men. Men who are full of energy, men who have vitality, and men who are always ready to face new challenges. When we talk about increasing testosterone and unleashing masculine power, we're talking about waking up that strong, powerful part of ourselves that's often hidden away.
Dopamine is released, more adrenaline, aka epinephrine, can be released, and you can, this sort of upward spiral of energy and sort of success with the occasional drops, right? I mean, nobody succeeds in every task, right? Sometimes the phone rings or the doorbell rings and you fail. Goodness, you fail to clean the cup. You come home, like, are you going to crash into a puddle of tears? No, you just clean it then and then put it away, right? Of course. But there's a slow system associated with achieving wins, even small wins. And that slow system is in the form of hormonal control that then translates to gene control. So two hormones in particular, testosterone and estrogen, which are present in both men and women, males and females, of course, are both when the dopamine system is activated. This has to do with the relationship between dopaminergic neurons and the pituitary gland, which releases gonadotropins and luteinizing hormones, which then stimulate the testes and the ovaries, et cetera, to release the so-called sex steroid hormones. The sex steroid hormones, testosterone and estrogen, of course, are involved in reproductive biology, but for motivational biology. And for the following reason: the steroid hormones are so-called lipophilic, and they can cross from the outside of a cell through the cell membrane to actually into the nucleus of a cell and control gene expression. So when we achieve wins repeatedly, and again, this doesn't matter if you're male or female, you achieve wins repeatedly, testosterone is the molecule that eventually accesses not just cells to control their immediate physiology, but goes into the nucleus of those cells and controls their gene expression. And what it translates...
So does that mean, does that mean that demotivated men are producing less testosterone?
We can say that the data show that repeated failures...
It's not about being aggressive or trying to control others. It's about using this energy and power to do good things and to achieve our goals. Having more testosterone can push you to do things that you never thought were possible, breaking down barriers in both physical and mental challenges. Unleashing the power of masculinity is like the rising of the sun. It's a force that inspires and motivates us to do and be better. Increasing your testosterone levels can have a very positive effect on every part of your life. From giving you more physical strength to making your mind sharper, it's like a natural energy boost, pushing you to reach higher and achieve more. But always remember, true strength is not about being the biggest or not about being the strongest. It's about being kind and respectful to others.
Take testosterone levels lower than they would be otherwise. That is not to say that people with low testosterone will always fail. Those with higher testosterone will always win. But just to be clear, because you are correct, but people sometimes get hitched on this causal part. But indeed, one of the quickest ways to boost someone's testosterone is to have them achieve a win of some sort. Now, the win is translated...
Well, one of the things you do in behavior therapy constantly is you help people calibrate the zone of proximal development. And it's one that you can actually manage. And so if you see people who are entirely stymied, we're sort of back to the cup of coffee or the coffee cup example, you want to find something they can do locally this week that would constitute at least a micro win. And you just keep... And if you talk to someone, you say, well...
Masculinity ain't about how much you can lift, bro. How many fights you can win, bro. It's about the strength of your character. Boosting your testosterone levels is part of the journey. It's about feeling confident in yourself, achieving your personal best in all things, and being able to bounce back when things get tough, because they will get tough. The real power of masculinity is understanding and controlling this energy, and using it for good, to build things, to inspire others, to achieve your goals. boosting your testosterone is part of the journey to becoming a stronger, more balanced, and more powerful man.
Maybe that's because they're learning in the way that you described. Okay, so back to the gene regulation. It increases testosterone, the wins, and
yeah. So testosterones are associated. Winners tend to be able to win more. There's some et cetera. But if we want to bring this into the common world, a few years back when I started doing some public-facing education, I started getting a lot of questions, especially on YouTube, from young males about pornography and masturbation. And this becomes very relevant here. We have to remember that this dopaminergic system is generalizable to many different behaviors, right? Academic pursuits, sports pursuits, relationship pursuits. But fundamentally, it was, again, I wasn't consulted at the design phase, but fundamentally it's tacked into the adaptive survival behaviors. And every species, including ours, has at least two major motivations, which is to protect its young and to make more of itself, to make more young at some level. One of the absolutely pathologic situations for any animal or human is to be able to access.
The process of boosting testosterone and unleashing your masculine power starts with the inside and it works its way out. It's about sparking that energy within you, an energy that can help improve your health, help give you more energy, and make your mind sharper. Being a man is about being strong, decisive, and focused. And the journey to boost your testosterone is part of becoming the best version of yourself. A man who is strong, full of life, and ready to face any challenge that comes his way.
Repeated dopamine surges without effort or any pursuit that's self-directed, or that's directed, I should say. So for instance, cocaine, a drug which potently increases dopamine, or methamphetamine, which adaptive action pursuit, except to acquire the drug and spend money on it. You'll sacrifice. So what ends up happening is the circuit that gets rewarded is only the drug-seeking behavior, and no other behavior will give the kind of potent dopamine release that cocaine or methamphetamine will, which is why they are so pernicious. Now, likewise, right. I'm not...
Well, plus they have that powerful reinforcing effect, right? So not only do you get that kick, but what's reinforced by the dopamine release is the behaviors that were right prior, particularly right prior to the ingestion. And if all that is the drug-taking behavior, that's all that develops.
That's right.
You build that monster inside your head.
That's right.
So I can see where you're going on the pornography front.
Right. So I was starting to get a lot of questions. I was kind of surprised. I thought, well, I'm male and, maybe that's why they feel comfortable asking. But people were saying, we're asking about pornography, and they were asking, I realized we want to... I'll just be direct about it. They were asking whether or not masturbation was bad. They were asking whether or not, and here's my stance on this. I'm a biologist and a neuroscientist, not a psychologist. A couple of things happen. First of all, what's being reinforced? What's being reinforced is a high dopaminergic response to watching other people engage in sexual behavior, which is very different than being in a first-person sexual experience. Okay, so right there, that what's being reinforced is not actually any kind of improvement in communication skills. It's voyeurism. And as these questions started to come in more and more, I started to realize there was a lot of kind of undertones of people talking about fear of or experience with sexual dysfunction that clearly pornography can lead to. And here I'm specifically talking about males. I actually don't know the literature on females. So and then you start to think about, okay, what happens in the cascade or the arc of it's parasympathetically dominant, meaning if somebody is too stressed, they actually can't engage in sexual behavior. The arousal response doesn't occur. Associated with the so-called sympathetic nervous system, which has nothing to do with sympathy, it has everything to do with, it's a kind of a stress response. And then it reverses to a parasympathetic response. And a hormone called prolactin increases dramatically after ejaculation in males. What does that do? That blunts dopamine release and testosterone for a very long period of time, which makes sense if pair bonding and sort of, in our species anywhere, there's this idea that then other molecules would be exchanged with partners, pair bonding, potential for raising mates, etc. Without getting into a huge discussion about that, the point is this. Masturbation and pornography are potently tapping into the dopamine system and can undermine the very processes of what I consider healthy processes of finding a mate, dating, communication, eventually, if it's appropriate, sexual interaction, etc.
It's undermining.
So this is very interesting. The biology explains it as what's left there is a kind of an open loop, a kind of an emptiness, right? Because bonding with the self is a complicated notion. I mean, there's a healthy version of that, of course, loving oneself and self-referencing. And again, this is more far more your domain than mine in terms of what a healthy self-relation is. But in the absence of a real partner there, absence of real sexual partner, there's an open loop of neurochemicals, including oxytocin and prolactin. The dopamine, remember, dopamine goes up during pursuit, anticipation, then peaks and then crashes below baseline. We can think of this, if I were to kind of expand on it, would be it's this kind of neurochemical, psychological equivalent of making your home environment filthy for a while, not actually putting you into this positive amplification of dopamine. So it depletes the dopamine system. And it's likewise in drugs of abuse and addiction, it eventually depletes the dopamine system. Initially, there's a huge dopamine surge with drugs of abuse like methamphetamine and cocaine. But over time, people are using more and more to achieve what is not such a great high. You even see this a little bit with kind of consumption of energy drinks. Like people are taking more and more chemicals within their energy drinks, and they're thinking about loud, fast music, energy drinks. It's kind of stacking of dopaminergic tools. Now, that's not as pathologic. In fact, there are some energy drinks I'll occasionally drink, and I enjoy them. I don't think we need to be entirely afraid of pursuing or engaging in things that release dopamine. Obviously, healthy sexual behavior, food that we love, social engagement, all of these things can be dopaminergic. It's the big peaks in dopamine that are particularly dangerous for the human being.
Yeah, well, you could see that's a cardinal danger of. You can only get rats addicted to cocaine if they're isolated rats in a cage. Yeah, they won't bar press for cocaine in a natural environment, and it's because they have alternative sources of dopaminergic gratification.
Inject a question about weight training and hormones. You hear this all the time, that doing these big, heavy compound movements or resistance training increases androgens, things like testosterone, DHT, DHEA, and so forth. Does anyone know how that actually happens? Like, what is it about engaging motor neurons under heavy loads sends a signal to the endocrine system, hey, release testosterone? I've never actually been able to find that in a textbook.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the stress response, right? It's mechanical stress and it's metabolic stress. And these are, the downstream regulation of testosterone release at the gonads comes from many different areas.
From the work that you did as a PhD student and throughout your career, could you say that there are some general principles of training that favor testosterone production in terms of that somebody who's not an elite athlete could use, somebody who's already adapted to weight training somewhat, like they know the difference between a dumbbell and a barbell, and they know the various movements, they're not going to damage themselves, but a typical person who's trying to use weight training to build or maintain muscle, lose body fat, so body recomposition, and or stay strong and healthy for sport of a different kind.
If you look at many of the exercise interventions that we use to try and investigate and interrogate testosterone,
6x10 meaning
6 sets of 10 repetitions, which is it's quite a large, 60 repetitions is quite a large volume for a single exercise, and that was usually pitched at about 80% of a 1 repetition max intensity.
Okay, so 80% of the 1 rep max, six sets of 10 reps separated by rest of like
2 minutes.
2 minutes, which is actually pretty fast, at least to me.
Anytime
you see these 2 to 3 minutes, when you're actually watching the clock, those 2-minute rest periods go by pretty fast.
By the third, fourth set, you're dying for more. Yeah. And I think we formulated that kind of exercise protocol to really target the release of testosterone and try and drive up these anabolic environments to study the endocrine consequences. But I think that's the type of protocol that is most advantageous for driving anabolic environments.
And that was it for the workout?
Yeah, I mean, we would do that in a back squat. So, multi-joint, challenging exercise, multi-muscle, multi-joint, 80% load of your 1 repetition max, and then 6x10. We did play around with, your classic German volume type 10x10. The key to what we also did was we always adjusted the loads to make sure that it was 10 repetitions that were sustained. So if the load was too high and an athlete or a participant had to drop the weight on the 6th repetition, we would unload the bar and make sure they completed the 10 repetitions.
I see. And you could imagine just taking very long rest, keeping the session, being a big lazy bear in training. I sometimes do this. I tell myself I'm going to work out for 45 minutes and then 2 hours later I'm done, but not because I was huffing and puffing the whole time, but because I was training really slowly.
And I think that comes back to the volume conversation. 6 sets of 10 is driving up metabolic stimulus. If you're doing 10 sets of 6, you can probably take it to a higher intensity, but you're not going to get the same metabolic load. You're not going to get the same internal metabolic environment that drives the lactate release that they will then signal, further anabolic testosterone release because of the lactate in your body. That's a key consideration. The rest is often the consideration that's overlooked out there in general population and in many sporting environments. That the rest is, and yes, if you extend the volume, if you extend the duration of your rest periods, what you're ultimately doing is influencing that metabolic stimulus again. You're allowing the flushing of the body, the removal of waste products, lactate to be, removed from the body, and then the metabolic environment is reduced.
So if I understand correctly, you want to create a metabolic stress.
Absolutely.
So the way that I've been training, slow and lazy, is not necessarily the best way to go. I could in theory do a 45 or 60 minute session where I pack in more work per unit time. I'm not going to be able to quote unquote perform as well. I won't be able to lift as much. I'm going to have to unweight the bar between sets, or maybe even during sets if I have someone who could do that. But it sounds like that's the way to go. So it's got to be, the old adage of high intensity, short duration is probably the way to go.
Correct. And in layman's terms, if the same objective, the same training goal is just muscle tissue growth, and we're not talking about maximal strength or any of those type of parameters, we're just talking about growing muscle. If there's an athlete A and they do six sets of 10 with 2 minutes rest, and there's athlete B that does 6 sets of 10 with 3 minutes rest, athlete A will likely see the highest muscle gains. Muscle hypertrophy gains because of the metabolic stimulus that they're driving with the shorter rest periods.
Interesting. And for all the years that I've spent exploring exercise science and trying to get this information from the internet and various places, that this is the first time it's ever been told to me clearly. Hypnosis is really a state of deep calm, yet high degree of focus and limited context.
In this video, we explore the link between mental and visual focus. When we are excited or interested, our attention narrows, which means that we get more focused on what we see. Think about when you're engrossed in a movie or absorbed in a challenging puzzle. Your mind and your eyes are locked in. They are absolutely captivated by the task at hand. Understanding this connection helps us navigate the world better. By recognizing how visual stimuli affect our attention, we can create environments that enhance concentration and productivity, setting up a distraction-free workspace or using visual cues to direct our focus are examples of optimizing this interplay. We can improve the performance that we have and make our experiences more fulfilling by harnessing the relationship between mental and visual focus.
Hypnosis seems to incorporate both the focus and the relaxation in a way that accelerates neuroplasticity.
Maintaining focus has become increasingly challenging today due to constant distractions from our phones and immediate surroundings. With smartphones constantly demanding our attention and various distractions vying for our focus, staying mentally engaged in tasks or activities is real hard nowadays. The constant allure of social media notifications, incoming messages, and the temptation to multitask can very easily pull us away from what truly requires our concentration. These distractions hinder our ability to stay focused, and they absolutely impact our overall productivity and well-being. It's important to set boundaries in our lives and with our devices to combat this, create dedicated periods of uninterrupted work or leisure, and cultivate mindfulness in our surroundings. Prioritizing mental focus amidst the barrage of distractions is vital for achieving our goals and maintaining balance in our lives.
Clinical hypnotists, they look at stage hypnosis as kind of they don't like it so much because it detracts from the power of this thing that we call hypnosis, and people get distracted by the fact that people can be inspired to do things that they wouldn't otherwise.
These powerful insights remind us of the vital role of creating a conducive environment and adopting behavioral tools that enhance our ability to maintain focus. We can establish an atmosphere that fosters deep concentration and mental engagement by consciously optimizing our surroundings and employing effective strategies. A crucial aspect is minimizing external distractions that often hinder our focus. This can be achieved by silencing notifications on our devices, seeking out a quiet and organized workspace, or reducing visual clutter in our immediate surroundings. Additionally, implementing behavioral tools such as time blocking, utilizing the Pomodoro technique or incorporating structured breaks can significantly boost our focus and productivity. See, these methods enable us to allocate dedicated periods of uninterrupted work while allowing for rejuvenating intervals, optimizing our mental stamina and preventing exhaustion.
Hypnosis is really a wonderful example of how vision can allow one to assess whether or not the brain can shift state easily or not.
Dr. Andrew Huberman has dedicated his research to exploring the fascinating fields of neuroregeneration, neuroplasticity, and brain states. Through his studies, Mr. Huberman has shed light on the remarkable ability of the brain to regenerate and to rewire itself. It's a process known as neuroregeneration. So the discovery has made significant implications for understanding how the brain can recover from injuries and adapt to new experiences. Furthermore, Dr. Huberman's work has been focused on neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. He has uncovered how our experiences, our thoughts, and behaviors can all shape the brain's structure and function, highlighting the incredible adaptability of our minds.
If you were going to do a breathwork practice, first of all, you don't need more than 5 minutes per day. If you were going to select one breathwork practice, cyclic sighing, this double inhales followed by exhales for 5 minutes a day, seems to have the greatest positive effect on the greatest number of parameters. And of course, there are other, box breathing is still useful, meditation is still useful. We certainly found positive effects of those practices, but it really points out the fact that some of these innate patterns of breathing, like cyclic sighing that we do naturally every 5 minutes or so, can be sort of hijacked, if you will, and brought into a more condensed form for 5 minutes a day. And I think 5 minutes a day is a pretty reasonable amount of time to ask of oneself to do breath work. And I should say it didn't matter if people did it early in the day or later in the day, but the consistency was important. So this is David Spiegel's work, and he's an interesting story. His father was actually a psychiatrist and hypnotist, and his father learned about hypnosis and incorporated it into his psychiatric practice based on a mentor that he had. So this is often how things are handed down in medicine. And so David learned it from his father. And I should say that the effects of clinical hypnosis are very robust. You know, incredible success with things like smoking cessation, incredible success with pain reduction, 50 to 80% reductions in chronic pain, outcomes in cancer, even probably due to the negative effects of chronic stress on cancer outcomes by reducing stress, trauma, and so forth. So basically, what Spiegel and his father developed was a assay, sort of what we call a curbside assay for determining whether or not someone has a high, medium, or low degree of hypnotizability. And this brings us back to the visual system. The neurons in the brainstem that control eye movements are they have a relationship either to the aspect of the nervous system that's associated with alertness or with calmness. And not surprisingly, when people look up, when the eyes are directed upward, that's actually in the neural pathways associated with alertness. When they look downward or close their eyelids, those are associated with the neural pathways associated with calmness and sleep, which is kind of a duh when you hear it. So like when you get tired, you kind of put your chin down and you close your eyes. When you're wide awake, you tend to be eyes up and eyes really wide. Recalling, of course, that your eyes are the two pieces of your brain that happen to be outside your cranial vault, and the only two pieces of your brain outside your cranial vault. So when you see eyes, those are two pieces of brain, which is just to underscore why they're so powerfully reflective of what's going on deeper in the brain. Yeah, people can look this up online. It sounds a little wacky, but there's something called the Spiegel eye roll test, which is not the, teen eye roll of the, that's usually associated with a different kind of sigh.
I'm familiar with that
one. We've all done it or experienced it. So basically, you can assess how hypnotizable somebody is by having them look up. I can actually do this with you right now. And again, I'm not, I'm hijacking David's tool. So you can look up towards the ceiling, and then while maintaining upward gaze, slowly close your eyelids. Okay, so you were able to just shut your eyelids down, and you can open your eyes now. And so what I observed was as soon as you brought your eyelids down, your eyes also moved towards me and your eyelids shut. Now, I'm very hypnotizable, and there's a little bit of a biased demonstration because I'm trying to illustrate the differences, but I fall at the very far end of the scale on high hypnotizability, where when I look up and then I don't want to go into hypnosis, and then I close my eyes, the whites of my eyes should still be exposed for a second before
So
I'll do it again.
in other words, you're able to maintain your pupils focused upward as you're closing your eyes.
Right. And the reason this test was developed, to be clear, because I realize this is probably all sounding a little bit wacko to people, the reason that this was developed is that there's a known role of particular cranial nerves, okay, 3, 4, and 7, as well as some other cranial nerves. One set of cranial nerves directs the eyes upward and is associated with alertness. The other set of cranial nerves directs the eyes downwards, associated with closing of the eyelid. So these are two competing circuits. People who are very capable of being hypnotized tend to be able to maintain activation of both circuits simultaneously, which will make sense for what I'm going to say next, which is that hypnosis is really a state of deep calm, yet high degree of focus and limited context. So remember that autonomic seesaw that we're either, asleep or panicked, drowsy or alert. And, in a waking state like you or I are in now, probably more towards alert but calm, kind of the seesaw is even. So this is almost an unusual bending of the seesaw in a way that you're both very relaxed and very alert, and context is limited by whatever the hypnotist says. Now, in clinical hypnosis, the goal is to get the person to self-direct their own mental changes. Whereas in stage hypnosis, the goal is exactly the same: bring people into a state of very calm, narrow context and increased focus, but the hypnotist is interested in directing the person's actions and states. So that's the key distinction. And I think that clinical hypnotists like Spiegel and others, who are also board certified physicians and psychiatrists, but I think all clinical hypnotists, they look at stage hypnosis as kind of they don't like it so much because it detracts from the power of this thing that we call hypnosis, and people get distracted by the fact that people can be inspired to do things that they wouldn't otherwise. So in a clinical hypnosis session, Spiegel or someone else would bring you in, you do this test, you would probably fall into the category of low to moderate hypnotizability. That might rule you out, but for most people, they're going to be moderate to high levels of hypnotizability. And then there would be some discussion while you were in this state of hypnosis where the clinician would encourage you to think about certain aspects of whatever it is that you're dealing with. So maybe it was problems with focus, and they would have you visualize two spotlights and bringing them together. Maybe it would be to focus on something that really bothers you quite a lot and the bodily sensations, and then to dissociate those bodily sensations. And the degree of positive clinical outcomes using hypnosis, again, are just remarkable. If people want to try this, there is an app I can mention that Spiegel has developed on the basis of the clinical data and a lot of scientific studies exploring the brain areas that are activated. It's called Reveri, R-E-V-E-R-I. And there are other clinical tools for hypnosis. I've personally found hypnosis to be very valuable for enhancing my ability to get into sleep. And for any time that I'm dealing with a problem that I can't seem to solve simply by talking, running, and a couple good nights sleep, or any kind of cathartic behavior that I might attempt. So there's a lot there. And there's a lot more to be said about that, and maybe Spiegel should step in at some point and join the conversation. But I think that hypnosis is really a wonderful example of how vision can allow one to assess whether or not the brain can shift state easily or not. It certainly involves narrowing of visual fields in order to anchor focus, and there's also a respiration component. Almost always in hypnosis, the hypnotist will encourage the person to take a deep breath as they close their eyes and to then imagine floating and being in a state of calm. And the bigger theme here, perhaps the most important theme, is that neuroplasticity, the brain and nervous system's ability to change in response to experience, really is a two-part process. The first part of that process always involves focus and attention. Especially as an adult, you simply cannot learn unless you are focused on what you want to learn. We know this. As a kid, there's a bit more passive learning. But as an adult, unless it's a negative event, which tends to automatically recruit your focus, right? The hot stove, the horrible experience, the car crash, the trauma of any kind, which immediately grabs all your attention, you have to direct your attention. And then the second part of neuroplasticity, because it is indeed a process, is periods of deep rest. It is during periods of sleep and what we call non-sleep deep rest that the neural circuits themselves change and rewire. Hypnosis seems to incorporate both the focus and the relaxation in a way that accelerates neuroplasticity. And so while it might seem kind of mystical or wacky or crazy, it makes perfect sense as to why this would be. It grabs both states of autonomic arousal, high degree of focus and arousal, and high degree of relaxation, and it compacts them into a single routine. On the one hand, you could imagine that the way to shift one's brain and body around a traumatic event or some challenge would be to really fully embody all the emotions and bodily sensations of that thing, and then over time desensitize yourself. So that's one form of gradual dissociation from at least the emotional component of something. You could also imagine that the goal is to split those off at the outset. And I'll just mention, we hear nowadays a lot about a FDA-approved therapy, which is ketamine therapy. Ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. It's being used to treat depression and trauma. This is kept in emergency rooms now. This is in widespread use. Work from my colleague Carl Diceroth's lab at Stanford has shown the precise neural networks in the brain that are activated by ketamine in an animal model, but also in humans. And it's very clear that it causes this dissociative state. It actually uncouples brain areas that normally would be coupled. And so you think, well, that's weird. I thought that in order to heal trauma, you're supposed to go into the trauma and then reduce the amount of emotion. But in these ketamine-induced states, people actively report things like, I was watching myself, third-personing myself go through the experience, which is exactly what you hear about people who went through a trauma, horrible sexual, things like sexual trauma like rapes. People say, I was floating above my body and could see it happening as somebody else. And yet the therapy for a lot of these, many of the therapies designed to treat trauma are exactly the sort of dissociative process that is occurring during the trauma. So I don't have an answer as to why those treatments can work, despite embodying the same kind of approach that happened during the trauma. What does seem to be the case is that accessing the state of mind that was occurring during the trauma or during anxiety or insomnia or pain, and then third-personing that experience and being able to imagine a different bodily or mental response seems to be the common theme through all treatments for trauma, fear, anxiety, etc. And the additional requirement, however, is that it's not sufficient to just cognitively rehearse it. There needs to be a shift in bodily state. And almost always what threads through all these therapies, like ketamine therapy or any kind of even cathartic therapy, is that at some point, the patient or the person needs to access a state of self-directed deep calm. And so, there are versions of hypnosis. For instance, if you're dealing with a particular problem, you imagine the problem on our left screen, this is under hypnosis, and a left panel, and then you write out in your mind the possible alternate responses on the right panel. You grow the size of that and reduce the size of the other. Might sound like, well, why would that work? But under conditions where the total context of the mind is set to that process, and you're not even aware of anything else going on in the room, that seems to accelerate the neuroplasticity and allows people to actually do that in real life out of hypnosis.